Good evening, everyone. My name is Mari Jones, the president of the IOP, zooming in from Columbia, South Carolina. So great to have you all with us today. Welcome to our fourth week of FAST Forums, our virtual series featuring conversations with prominent public figures, including elected officials, journalists, and activists. While we cannot join together in person today, technology allows us to convene virtually, and bringing FAST Forums online allows us to share Harvard University's premier arena for political speech, discussion, and debate across many states and countries while we are remote for the remainder of this semester. So please join me in welcoming our moderator for today, IOP Director Mark Gearan.
Well, thank you, Mari, and thanks for your leadership and the entire student leadership of the IOP. It's been an important time while, as you say, we're away from campus. We can all stay glued together and engage in important topics. So we are deeply grateful to you and your whole team. We are thrilled today to have George Stephanopoulos, ABC's chief anchor and host of Good Morning America. George, thanks for doing this last week. We're all set to do it, and we had a great news. Yeah. News gets in the way, but you are nice to reschedule this.
Yeah, happy to do it. What a time, huh?
Unbelievable. Well, I should tell our students, we have lots of students tuning in and listening on live stream as well as through this webinar. Newly admitted students, there will be incoming first-year students to Harvard next year, so we're thrilled to have them, and of course, college and faculty and staff colleagues. So we are glad to have all of them here. I should say at the outset to our listeners that George and I have known each other and been friends for some time. We've worked on a couple of presidential campaigns together and served in the White House. So we go back a bit, and so it's great to have you here. I was remembering, George.
How long it is? Like 32 years.
We don't want to go through that. I know. It's just, well, we look the same. That's the main.
Yes, exactly.
When I was a college president at Hobart and William Smith, I started what was called the President's Forum, which was modeled on the JFK Junior Forum. My big idea was to have George as our first guest. I thought that would be a great thing. So I called George. I said, George, do you believe in free speech? He said, well, of course I do. I said, good, you're going to give one at Hobart and William Smith. So George is back as a proponent of free speech here. Glad to have you here. So let me kick it off first. You know, people want to know how you're doing. You announced last week that you had tested positive. What are you doing? How's your family? How's Allie doing? You've had a personal dimension to the COVID-19 crisis.
I feel fine. I've been working from home here now for, I guess, almost 4 weeks now. I had one of those cases that was never really symptomatic. Never had a fever, never had chills, never had headache, never had cough or shortness of breath. I did one night now several weeks ago. I was very tired and I woke up with a lower backache one night. And then what turns out to be kind of the most telling sign, I did have one day where I lost my sense of smell. And that was the sure sign. But Allie had a tough case. She was in bed for most of 3 weeks. She's much better now. She's basically 100% right now. And I'm completely asymptomatic now. And beyond that, it's now been so long. I found out I'm going to be part of a trial now to donate blood plasma because I've completely recovered. I'm negative, and I actually have, for what it's worth, positive antibodies. So I'm going to be part of this clinical trial to donate the plasma. And so far, our girls are doing great. So it's all good.
That's good. Well, all best wishes. That'll be important research that you're a part of. Good for you. Well, let me just jump right in. And we have loads of students stacked up with questions. So I'll just pick around a few topics and then we'll go right out to our students. Let me start, George, from your role as chief anchor, but obviously someone who's owned public service is known. You've served at high levels of government. In your reflections on the media, there will be loads of opportunity to reflect on how our public servants, governments here in the United States, across the world reacted to it. Talk with us about your reflections on the media's introspection here and how the media, particularly broadcast media, is covering the pandemic and what your preliminary thoughts are going forward.
Well, they are preliminary because I think we're all learning so much about this right now and trying to figure out exactly what happened and what warning signs maybe all of us missed to some degree. I think that, I do think that early on, we were covering this as we were learning things in the media, as we were learning what was happening in China. We had a correspondent. in China, in the region. But as you know, though, like part of what we do, though, is try to find out not only what's happening, but a lot of what we report is keying off what the government responses are as well. And I think that, one of the things we saw in January when this was gaining steam, certainly in China and beginning to take hold around the world, there's no question that there was an awful lot of focus on impeachment, the Senate trial of President Trump, the primaries coming up in Iowa, New Hampshire. So it was the kind of thing where on Good Morning America, we would do a piece probably every morning, but it wasn't leading the show by any means. And we were basically, responding to what was happening overseas is what we were learning from the WHO. Since it's ramped up, there's been this push-pull, and I can go through my emails and texts and direct messages and whatever, and there's probably a split between viewers and readers who think we're ramping up hysteria by covering it and actually making people more fearful and perhaps even worsening the economic downturn, and those who say we haven't done enough. I don't go by the old idea that guarantees you're doing it exactly right. We're doing the best we can right now, but I know that's where the tension is right now. Since March 12th or so, since the president gave that Oval Office address, we basically have done nothing but COVID. And what we're trying to do is give out a lot of medical advice. We're trying to highlight the best science. You can't avoid the politicians or the politics behind this. Our ABC News, we made a decision relatively early on not to take the president's briefings live unless we knew there was an actual major announcement to be made. And what we've done in the last week or so is then when an announcement like the guidelines last week comes out, rather than covering the whole press conference, we'll wait for that announcement, show the actual announcement of the news, and then come back to our own analysts to put it in perspective and put it in context and do fact checking. So that's the way we've decided to deal with that.
And speak to us about 2020. I mean, what does this mean for Vice President Biden's campaign and how one breaks through the news? As so much has been reflected on in recent days about the challenge of a campaign, and how does the media think about balancing all the equities involved?
That's going to be so tricky. I mean, is it going to be a real campaign? Number one, and it doesn't look like for several weeks, perhaps months, you're going to have anything like normal rallies. I'd be very surprised if we have normal conventions in July and August. I think that's going to be very different. I'm not sure what it's going to look like yet, but I just can't imagine having 30,000 people 4 days in a row in the arena in North Carolina or Milwaukee. It's just hard for me to imagine. And then, we're going to, I think, spend a fair amount of time covering what the voting is going to look and feel like and what the right way to do voting in the midst of a crisis like this is going to be. As for the back and forth, I'm not I don't know yet how we're going to balance that out every day. I'm not sure how front and center the campaign is going to be every day. So much of that is going to depend on, when you've still got major cities with thousands of people in the hospital and 500 people, even though it's getting better in New York, 500 people died yesterday, and you've got numbers like that. I don't think you're going to see the kind of campaign coverage you normally would see in a presidential election year. But we are going to have to be very careful about making sure that the coverage isn't monopolized by one side, even though I do think this is, even more than normal, because there is no normal now. This election is going to be a referendum on President Trump, even more than it's going to be seen as a traditional choice, given what's happening with this crisis right now and given the economic impact.
Interesting. And really very interesting. Well, let's go right out to our students. Our first is a Harvard senior from here in Winthrop House, Ruthie.
Oh, Hi, Mr. Stephanopoulos. Thank you so much for joining us today. As Mark said, my name is Shruti, and I'm a senior here at the College studying government. Kind of going off of Mark's question itself, given that unlikelihood of having in-person campaign events between now and the general, do you think that candidates and their surrogates will really try to use broadcast networks to do their campaigning? And if so, what do you think is the responsibility of news organizations like ABC in mediating that extent to which candidates would be offered TV interviews that they could use for such campaign-esque purposes?
It's going to be, and we also have to how we make those decisions is going to be informed by how we covered the last campaign as well. And I think there's been a lot of reflection about that over the last 4 years and whether we were truly even-handed in the way we covered the campaigns. Was the coverage unbalanced in some way? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of debate that on both sides, but I think we're going to be extra sensitive to it this time around. Generally, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I have two big programs at ABC. I'll take any candidate anytime they want to come on, basically. I mean, and that was one of the things that happened last time around. I mean, we got criticized for how much coverage President Trump got during the 2016 campaign. The truth was that he hardly ever said no. I mean, I probably did 45 interviews with him. Hillary Clinton did maybe one or two, you know. But I have an open invitation to the president to come on the show whenever he wants. Vice President Biden's welcome whenever he wants, and I'm sure we're going to be taking their surrogates as well. So I think in that sense, the coverage will be, I'm not worried about any equity problems right there. I think the difficulty is going to be, and Mark alluded to this in his question, in the midst of a national crisis like this, the president's words, you know, automatically have so much weight. They do anyway, but in a crisis like this, that's magnified. Now, that puts a responsibility on us, if we're going to cover that, to make sure that we, as I said, put it in context. That if things that are being said that are either untrue, we have to make sure that our audience knows that as well. And it's not just, and then sometimes that means, and it goes to how we've chosen to cover some of the press conferences, if we kind of know that something is untrue when it's said, there's no reason to put that in a piece every time and then say in a sentence afterwards, oh, it's not true. You know, sometimes you just choose then, you know, that's just not worth broadcasting. But those are the kinds of editorial decisions we end up making every day.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Susie. She was well-trained as an ABC News intern last year through the IOP. Our next question is Eric Gemma. Eric?
Hey, Eric.
Hi, Mr. Stephanopoulos. Like Mark said, my name is Eric. I'm a junior at the college, zooming in from New Jersey today. I just want to thank you for taking the time to chat with us. Glad that you and your wife are both doing well.
Thank you.
So I would imagine that the vast majority of students tuned in today are undergraduates like myself. And like Mark mentioned, we have a lot of incoming first-year students watching today too. And so my question for you would just simply be what message you'd like to share with students of today who are largely sort of feeling uncertain about their futures, whether that be career, educational prospects, uncertain about health of their families or future plans.
I got to say, my heart goes out to all of you. I mean, my daughter was just here. She's a high school junior. So she's going through all that anxiety and uncertainty that comes with that year when you're applying to the colleges and looking at the colleges and taking your standardized tests and worried about how you're going to be judged as you're applying. And I know that she and all her friends, you know, are dealing with a great deal of uncertainty. And you all have it as well in the colleges right now. You don't know what your college life is going to look like. You don't even, I mean, I suppose you don't even know whether next semester you're going to be doing your classes virtually or on campus yet. At least we all hope it'll be happening on campus, but there's no way to know for sure yet. So like I said, I start out with a great deal of empathy for all of you, because I know all the anxiety and uncertainty that comes with being someone who's looking at colleges or entering college or dealing with that time in your life where you're trying to figure out what direction you want to go in is magnified 1,000 times over when you're going through something like this. Now, that said, and I don't want to be Pollyanna about this in any way, but understand as well that you're living through an historic moment where there's so much to be learned, so much to be seen, and so much to be done in order to make the best of this moment. And we're dealing with massive changes that are going to course through society, course through our economies, course across the world, for decades, based on what's happening right now. And I think that's an opportunity to learn and an opportunity to figure out how to serve and what direction you might want to go in a time of incredible tumult and change.
Speaking of the class of 20, thank you, Eric, the class of 2024, we do have an incoming student, Juante, who's on the phone. He was engaged with our students over the weekend learning about the IOP. Congratulations on your admission to Harvard, and please ask George your question.
All right, Juante, congratulations.
Thank you. So my name is Hyuntae. I'm zooming in from Rhode Island, and I had a question. As a member of the news media and as someone who has contracted the virus, what aspects of the developing coronavirus story do you think the media should be focusing more attention
on? We're trying to focus on all of it. I mean, I think it starts with the science. I think the most important thing everybody wants to know is, what do we know about the virus itself? What do we know about what it does to people? What do we know about how it spreads? What do we know about how to treat it? What do we know about the potential for a vaccine? I was on with Dr. Fauci this morning. He was just just such a remarkable man. But one of the things we ended up talking about is, with normal viruses, you generally think if you've had it and you have the antibodies, that means you're immune. And in fact, with this one, we don't know that yet. And that's one of the things we had a dialogue about on the program this morning. And I thought that was especially important because this is new information to so many people. And we are dealing with so much unknown. I do think it's important also for people to understand the real human cost, not only for those who are going through the disease, but also, as we've seen, the economic fallout. I mean, and here just in the United States alone, more than 22 million people over the last month out of work. That's a staggering number. It's a number that hasn't been seen since the days of the Great Depression. We all hope that it's going to lead to that it's not going to be have the length of the Great Depression, but we've never seen a drop like that so quickly. And I think we have to make sure we're covering that human cost as well and paying attention to those stories. And then third, and this is just so speculative, but it's just something we have to pay attention to. What is this doing to our society, to our social life, to the mental, physical, and emotional life of the nation? I think that's also an important aspect of the story for us to cover.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Monte. Next is a former IOP student at the business school, William Marks.
Hey, William.
Hey, George. Hey, Mark. Thanks for having me. A question not related to coronavirus, which is, could you talk a little bit about how you decided to get your start in politics and what you would say to students today who are interested in getting into politics and how it's a bit different?
Well, everything's different now, as Mark and I were joking about. It was such a long time ago when I got involved. I think I kind of got the bug in college. And my junior year, I had the chance to be an intern for my local congresswoman. It was called the LBJ internship at that time. I think it was 4 weeks long. And I went to Capitol Hills and just thought it was the most exciting place to be. And so after that, when I finished college, I went back to another internship in Washington at a think tank and then worked for my local congressman. And then kind of one thing led to another over the course of the years. Mark and I met in, as I said, 1987 when I worked for the Dukakis campaign. Then I went to work for Dick Gephardt and then President Clinton and his campaign. So I caught the bug pretty early on, although I should say that throughout high school and college, and even in graduate school, I was always interested in both politics and journalism. I was doing journalism during college and graduate school. And then I joked, when I was leaving graduate school, I actually applied for jobs in politics and media, and I still have the rejection letter from Nightline. I ended up back in politics, but eventually I ended up having careers in both.
Life takes interesting twists, doesn't it?
It does.
I love it.
But
Adrian, remember go ahead, George.
Yeah, just to answer the second part of your question.
Yeah.
Boy, and again, it plays off the last question as well. I think if you have an inclination at all in that direction, now is the time to jump in and serve and find a way to be involved, because there's so much to be done. And as I said, we're at a time of such massive tectonic changes in our political and social life that I think it's more important than ever for people who have that inclination to dive right in.
Well said. Well said. Do you think, George, it will lead to a different kind of political appreciation of public service and kind of what it means to be active, engaged citizenship in the body politic?
I mean, we'll see. I mean, there's, on the one hand, I can make an argument that to some degree the political system is responding to this crisis with, kind of shock and awe and speed. I mean, the economic response that you've seen from Congress and the White House and the Fed, for that matter, has just been unlike anything we've ever seen in our lifetimes. Now, what the repercussions of that will be over time, I think, are harder to know. But I do know in the wake of this, there's going to be an awful lot of work to be done.
Yeah. Let's go to another member of the class of 2024, Adrian. Adrian?
Hi. Hi, thank you for having me. I'm from Orange County. It's nice to meet you. I was just wondering today, what steps would you take? I mean, I know a lot of people may start getting restless as quarantine begins to extend for an unprecedented amount of time. I was wondering, what can maybe the media do to because I get sometimes it can be hard, sometimes when the media is showing certain numbers, they can show how many cases have been going out, what is happening across the country. But sometimes that can be difficult for some people to comprehend like the actual gravity if it's not happening directly in front of them. And this can lead to some restlessness of them wanting to get out of the house and starts not following some of the rules that are being put in place. What could we do to maybe combat that issue as it maybe will start to grow in the future?
I mean, the most important thing, I go back to what I said at the very beginning, is to talk about the science first and the facts first, and make sure that we're putting out that information as clearly as we possibly can. We do try to get to one of your other points. We tried generally when we talk about the new cases and the deaths from this, we also have tried to pretty consistently also talk about the number of people who've recovered. My own guess, and based on a bit on my own experience, is that we're going to find out that far more people have this than we know. There's been an awful lot of asymptomatic people are walking around or did walk around and had it, which at some level, I mean, it's scary because more people were spreading. On the other hand, it's good news because it would suggest that maybe the virus is a little less lethal than we think. But we're just, again, on this story, it's the science first. The correspondent now who is on our air more than any other correspondent is our doctor, Dr. Jennifer Ashton. And that's what we're always going to be leading with.
Alex Chan is a member of our foreign committee, and so he has the next question. Alex?
Thank you.
Hi there, Mr. Stephanopoulos. Thanks for joining us today. My question is, so recently we've been seeing a lot of protests around the country, people protesting stay-at-home orders, and I'm just curious what you see the media's role in it is, because you guys have to report on what's actually happening around the country, but at the same time, you don't want to give people too much airtime and think that it's safe to go out, or that these stay-at-home orders, which are saving lives, are actually just ridiculous.
Wow,
so how do you balance that?
Welcome to our editorial meeting over the last 3 days. I mean, that's exactly right. First of all, one of the things we see is that, and there's a number of layers to this. On the one hand, yeah, no one likes being under a stay-at-home order. It's oppressive. It makes you restless. It makes you anxious. I mean, but as most of the governors who've imposed them, and have been in just about every state, said that you're not doing it. It's not about you. It's not even about necessarily protecting yourself. It's about protecting everyone around you. Then that's the only way to do it. And then secondly, and this is where it gets tricky. These these protests are meant to, and they grab attention. And so, our cameras are drawn to that. But we want to make sure that we don't blow them out of proportion. There are relatively few protests across the country right now. More than 60% of the country, if you go by polling, says that they're perfectly comfortable or they understand why they need to be following the stay-at-home order. So you don't want to turn this protest movement, which at some level is also highly organized, and there's a political motivation behind a fair amount of it as well. You don't want to make it seem like it's a spontaneous populist movement when perhaps, and broad-based, when it may not be, number one. And number two, you want to make sure you then, as you're showing it, again, going back, reporting the science. Two examples on how I've dealt with it myself just today. I asked Dr. Fauci about it, and he had a very thoughtful answer where he talked about understanding the impulse behind it, but reminding everybody what the regulations are about and the science behind it. And I also had an interview with Mark Zuckerberg, who's in Facebook's in a bit of a tricky position here on these protests. Most of these protests, or many of them, are being organized across Facebook, but Facebook also has a policy that if you're putting out actively harmful information about coronavirus, then that information should be taken down, or that activity should be taken down. So the question I asked Mark Zuckerberg is, if you have people who are saying these social distancing regulations are not necessary, are not doing any good, so come to the state capitol and protest, I said, does that qualify as harmful information that should be taken down? It was a difficult question for him, but he said that in certain cases, yes, it would lead to that.
Interesting. George, you've been time. We have one last question from Amanda. Amanda?
Hi, Amanda.
Hi, it's so nice to meet you, and thank you so much for taking the time to do this. My name is Amanda. I'm from Chicago, and I just wanted to ask, for some, watching the news and seeing the coronavirus just everywhere can be really anxiety-inducing. And even though the main concern, even though the main concern of the media is obviously to inform the public, do you think the news should also play a role in fostering positivity during this time? And if so, how has GMA and you yourself done that?
Yes. The short answer is yes. And I wear 3 hats at ABC, and each one it takes a different angle on that. As chief anchor, when I'm covering a special event, I think my job is to cover the news and to make sure that it's understood and put in context, and people have all the facts they need. So I'm not looking necessarily to promote any feeling out of that. This week is a little bit different. It's focused a public policy oriented show, but to that degree, but to some degree, we feel a responsibility to, certainly report the hopeful signs we're seeing in the spread of the virus, possibilities of a treatment or a vaccine. Now, GMA is a very different show. It's a split between news and entertainment and information to help people just live their lives. And so we do a lot more. We spend a lot more time on GMA doing things like focusing on the good work of the healthcare workers and highlighting their personal stories and talking about different ways that people have chosen to come together. And, whether it's virtual concerts or Zoom dance parties, or, bringing in parenting experts to talk to parents about how to handle doing their job at home while homeschooling their kids. So we cover a much broader range of stories on GMA. We have 2 hours every morning, and we try to make sure that a good portion of it is dedicated to the kind of the stories you identified right there.
Thank you, Amanda. It's an appropriate question, sir. Into the forum we're going to have on Thursday, George, where we'll be releasing our spring poll that we do twice a year.
Oh, yeah.
Young people, 18 to 29-year-olds. And what we've been tracking in our poll, and our pollster, John Delavolpe, is kind of anxiety among young people. So we're having the release of the poll on Thursday, and then a forum at 6 o'clock that everyone's welcome to with John Delavope, our pollster, as well as Charlotte Alter, who's written the new book on the ones we've been waiting for in the next generation. So it'll be an interesting mix of what we're finding, what young Americans are thinking in the context of COVID and, of course, politics. So
we'll be taking a look at that on GMA. Good to know.
Yeah, that's good. Well, Joy, we can't thank you enough. It's so nice to see you in this weird kind of way. Thank you for doing this, buddy. And thanks to our students for really thoughtful questions.
Really great. Thank you, guys.
Stay healthy. Thanks, George.
Bye-bye.
Take care.